Hello, my name is Tiffany McIntire. I'm a senior human factors engineer working in Roche Pharma with delivery devices in the packaging department. I'm here today to talk about usability considerations for oral delivery, pediatric and geriatric patients specifically. So in this presentation, I want to give a brief introduction to what human factors engineering is, kind of walk through a few case studies, things that we consider the human factors engineering process. How do we ensure patient safety? That's really a goal, obviously, for us. And some cross-cultural observations and considerations within oral suspension, oral solution dosing, acceptability and preferences from users. And I'll finish off with a nice list of resources and discuss a little bit about the trends in health authority opinion and expectation for combination products as well as non-combination products. So human factors got its start in the 1940s. The US government, the military specifically, they hired a bunch of psychologists to find the perfect pilot to fly their lovely airplanes. And if you've ever seen a cockpit of an airplane, it's incredibly complicated. So lots of different buttons, lots of lights, lots of stimulus that's kind of coming at you all at once. And then obviously it's a very critical situation. It even depends on like where the pilot is taking off and landing from. And in a war situation, even more so, of course. So what ended up happening was that the psychologists were trying to find the perfect pilot. And the first group of psychologists failed to do this. The second group of psychologists, they started to ask themselves, what if we started to fit the tool to the person rather than trying to fit the person to the tool? They felt like it might be a little bit easier to change the design than it would be to change people. And I would have to agree. So ended up happening, just one of the quick design changes that they made is there were two levers that did two different functions. One were for the wheels, the other one was for the wings. And they ended up adding kind of these wheels to each side of one of the handles. So without even looking, you have this affordance, this design language, this tactile cue that you could use with your hands to say, okay, that's the one for the wheels. Then the one for the wings had a little bit of a wing shape on either side. So when human factors gets applied in these types of instances, it's usually for aerospace, nuclear power plants, hospitals, medical device development, healthcare in general. And it's applied when use errors could result in critical harm or potentially even death. And just one last thing about the field is that we pull from many different fields of psychology as well as engineering. It's definitely a cross-functional job, and it takes a whole team to get that in-depth understanding about people, their environment that they're working in, as well as the things that they're interacting with themselves. Here, I wanted to quickly discuss oral syringe use. So what would be something that I consider with that? So this is what I would assume to be a parent. This is a father. And I might have to think about how chaotic his home is. Is this his first child? Just having a baby in general? Is the baby going to be easy to give the medication to? How much medication do they have to give? Is it difficult to press down on that phalange? So looking at a little bit of the biomechanics of it. Maybe the child has had different types of medications that they've been on, and so the father has previous product experience. So he has expectations now about how to use this because of other products that he has used. And is there something unique about our product that I need to make clear? So for example, is it temperature sensitive? Is it light sensitive? Is it something with a limited in-use period? These types of things where I have to make it very clear on the carton box or these other areas where I can really get his attention or his wife's attention when they're picking this up from the pharmacy or when they're going to use it, about how this product could be different from other products that they've used. I would say that's one big key consideration that I have, as well as obviously toxicity and some of these other things that play into it. But the more chaos and the more tired that we are tends to be that it opens us up a little bit more to use error, which kind of brings me to my next slide. So this is James Reason's Swiss cheese model. So there are different levels or different things that have to occur in order for harm to happen. Sometimes we call them compound use errors. So that might mean multiple use errors have to happen in order for harm to occur. But in this example, we have that the parent has picked up the medication from the pharmacy, they're at home, they're about to give their child a dose, and they've just read the pharmacy label, and they've read zero 0.8 mLs as 8 mLs. So maybe the pharmacist didn't put that zero in front. Maybe they did, but he's just rushing. He wants to get this done. There are other things that he has to do that day. And he thinks, okay, 8 mLs. So he withdraws it with the syringe and still doesn't recognize that this might be too much for the baby. And the parent continues to administer the overdose. So this happens not just once, but it continues to happen for, until the harm is noticeable. So until like an adverse event has really occurred and it's a noticeable overdose, this happens. So the baby gets taken to the hospital because they have difficulty breathing, something like this, and then it's discovered how this has occurred. This may sound unrealistic to some people. How could someone mistake 0.8 mLs for 8 mLs? How is that going to happen? So this is actually a realistic case study. This was published in the Institute of Safe Medical Practice newsletter, May 2016. I put the reference in the bottom right-hand corner for you. And actually, a very similar use error was requested as a product change for the same product by EMA, and I put that reference in there for you to look at on your own. And also reference for James Reason and Tavanti Woods, so some good resources to better understand the Swiss cheese model. Human factors process and toolkit. So I wanted to relate our activities back to clinical trial activities, just to give you an idea about when do I get assigned to a project. In 2000, it's important to note, in 2011, the FDA started to require human factors engineering reports, summary reports, things like that, to be a part of combination product as well as 510(k) medical device submissions. And I think that this is a great process that can also be applied to non-combination products to ensure safe and effective use. It is not a regulatory requirement, but I would say if you have if you have products that it may be not a combination product, maybe it's one direction labeling like we have in the US, where we assume that the pharmacy has these supplies available, that you might bring a human factors engineer and just to look at the process. Are they going to use it exactly the way we expect them to? And I'll get to this a little bit more later, but just wanted to flash this so you get an idea about some of the tools that we use and what we're doing. So our first step is to define the context of use. So we define what the medical indication is, who the intended users are, their user profiles. So we gather relevant demographic information. So age, are we expecting it to be elderly users? Could it be pediatric patients that are using this product for themselves? I've put an asterisk next to this one. So for product experience, are you changing an existing practice? This is such a huge question. So if you're asking a pharmacist or a prescribing physician or a patient or a caregiver or anyone to start doing tasks that they don't normally do, then you're asking for behavior change. And in psychology, just business development, any world of psychology, behavior change is the hardest thing to do, especially if I would say like in these healthcare settings, because just like you and me, these people are busy and maybe they aren't made aware of this change. So for the pharmacy, they get a new product in and it has some special attributes, but that hasn't really been made clear to them. It would be my job in partnership with the cross-functional team to investigate this and see whether or not something like labeling, so like putting information on the carton label, would be enough to change existing practices. And it's a big question, to be honest. There's some lower hanging fruit like literacy level, some bigger topics like impairments that may affect use. I've got a whole slide on that. And medication management. So if they've got several different medications, could this be a difficult one for them to juggle with everything else? Is it something that could be easily, integrated into what they're doing? The use environments at home, is it in the clinic, stress levels in that environment, distractions. And then I also try to ensure that I have use steps and the full task analysis. So what's everything that the user has to do in order to give a safe and effective dose? What's everything that can go wrong? How am I preventing that from going wrong? And then testing it in a usability study. So patient characteristics to consider. So we're looking at perceptual, cognitive, and physical impairments here. So perception is the way we receive information. So as the user starts to do their task, the very first task, what are they going to see? And as they go through their tasks, is there something about the disease or comorbidities of the disease that are going to impact what they see, what they hear, what they're touching and feeling? So this could be color blindness, degraded visual acuity, and other factors affected by age. Cognition, the way we process information. So maybe the user sees something or they read something, but they're not able to fully process it. This could be caused by cognitive fog. This happens from pain, chemotherapy treatment, overstimulation, cognitive processing issues due to age or a comorbidity or co-occurring disease. Alzheimer's, attention deficit disorders are something to consider here, as well as cognitive issues due to workload and product complexity. So if you have a product that has 15 use steps and every one of them has to be conducted in a certain way, that could actually be very overwhelming for someone and hard for them to achieve that task efficiently. So they have to do that really quick. 15 steps may be a bit inappropriate for the task. Physical, lastly, so parts of the body we use to accomplish tasks. So are these parts of the body affected? I actually just put hands here, but since we're talking about orally administered products, people's ability to swallow, the size of their trachea, these are other things that definitely have to be considered with product use. So hand dexterity issues result from diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, as well as limited mobility. This could be a high body mass index for people that are obese, a bit more applicable when it comes to self-injection though. But for hand dexterity, definitely has to be considered if someone has to open a bottle, if they have to, use a blister pack, and obviously that balance between being child-proof, but also being, senior-friendly or arthritis-friendly, that these users can also use their products. Putting it into practice. So I always advocate for doing a pipeline assessment. So you're mapping your users, uses, and use environments. This can give you a really high-level overview, and it's a nice snapshot where you can take all the different diseases that your products can be indicated for, what could be the perceptual impairments, cognitive and physical, as we talked about before, resulting from the disease, as well as comorbidities. It's good to track comorbidities as well. So if it's people who are over the age of 65, age-related issues that may result are also important. I find that with pediatric users, I tend to put a lot more focus on within that chronic disease state. How much independence do they have? So diabetes is one example. I know that doesn't have as much to do with oral, but children start to inject themselves or be responsible for their medication management or partnered responsibility of medication management between the patient and the caregiver. Might call that a patient-caregiver dyad. They start being responsible together when the child is about 10 or 12 years old, which seems really young to us. But I think it's really easy to relate this to other activities or forms of independence that children have around that age. Their chronic disease is something that they're living with. And it's just, at some point, it's like brushing their teeth. It's like getting dressed in the morning. It's a part of their daily habits and rituals that they eventually are going to become responsible for. And some children might be a bit more autonomous than others, but we want to make sure that our products are targeted towards patient empowerment, I think, for both children as well as elderly users. Quick topic here about oral delivery. So this would be oral suspension, oral solutions specifically. I will just put your attention on scenario 3, just because that's the one where I think I see this coming up a bit more and more in a few different companies that I've worked in. So when we're switching from adult formulations to pediatric formulations, there are different things that we're looking at where there are dispersible tablets, stick packs, weight-based dosing. There's quite a bit of product complexity already with weight-based dosing. And rewinding that a bit further to constitution. So if there aren't preservatives in the drug product, maybe we're trying to go to market as quickly as possible. Some of my product teams that I've talked with, they imagine a future where a caregiver could pick up unconstituted medication in the materials at the pharmacy, take that home, do constitution at home, and then also do the dosing administration at home. And that may be driven because there's a limited in-use period. So maybe that in-use period is 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, and they think it would just be better for patient flexibility if they could just, simply add the water, swirl or shake at home. Some of the post-market or market feedback that we've gotten is that there are cultural differences here. So in the United States, it is common for the pharmacies to have oral syringes and potentially measuring devices for the medications available. It depends on the pharmacy. You'll have to do your own research about what types of pharmacies your product could be going in. There's going to be a difference between retail pharmacy, specialty pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, and what materials they might have available. But also when you talk to pharmacists, you also might find that they are not comfortable, at least in the United States, dispensing these powders, dispensing these granules without it being constituted. And if they do, this isn't going to be a main use case for them. This is going to be something that they do for a special occasion, like you're going to travel, they really trust the patient or they really trust the caregiver. There's a bit of like an aptitude assessment to some extent, if you will. So if it's within a product scope or the project team scope to make scenario 3 here that I've outlined a primary use case, I would just like to say that it doesn't really work, and that requires quite a bit of behavior change. So it's something you may want to reconsider, but there are cross-cultural differences because other countries do this as a common practice. It's just that I can say in one country such as the United States, it's not a common practice. So quick snapshot of considerations for formulation and product teams, which is the few minutes that we have left here. At-home constitution, I would say it has to be really well understood. You may have some resistance from pharmacists to dispense this product. You may have resistance from patients and caregivers to constitute this product at home. Limited in-use period after constitution. This makes the product a lot harder to use, and it may not meet patient or caregiver expectations. And you might be increasing the risks of your product unintentionally. So it's something to really consider is like, what is the in-use period after constitution? And I would suggest to consider something around 24 to 48 hours at least. Anything less than that, I would raise a bit of a red flag or some concerns just in case. So co-packaging versus not co-packaging, how will users receive these supplies, what is available in the pharmacy, communicating this to the pharmacist. And also, if you're doing one direction labeling, so if you're not co-packaging these products, are you going to include in instructions for use to indicate how to use them together and what do they need to have? Age-related acceptability, I've got a list of references in the next slide or two about that you can look into about palatability, swallowability, usability, all the illities. And EMA's had some really nice white papers about this recently. It's just something to consider, even if it's not a combination product. Life cycle of the label should be considered early on. So me as a human factors engineer, I want to know who all the possible users could be. And the earlier I know that, the more I can test it and ensure that their needs are going to be met. So with this weight-based dosing and with the fluids that we tend to try to make out of the capsules, et cetera, or tablets in the oral space, it tends to be indicated for children and also adults that have difficulty swallowing. So I would have to look at different users for that and also just different use cases and different quantities of the medication. So the earlier that this is known, the more you can kind of head off issues later on in the manufacturing complexity process, et cetera. And finally, I think you might have heard me say this before, patients are users. So consider those patient caregiver dyads and how these responsibilities evolve. Very quickly, the regulations and guidelines on usability for your reference, as well as a few more references. Thank you for your time.